Hi, I'm Kim Skildum-Reid from Power Sponsorship in Sydney, Australia, and today's topic is sponsorship leverage versus sponsorship activation, the difference in those terms and why it matters. And you'll notice if you read any of my materials, if you read my books, if you watch the videos, I always use the term leverage, and there's a big reason for that. So we'll get into that in a minute, but what I want to talk about first is that these terms are often confused. They're often used interchangeably, but they can, for some organizations, be very different, and that can be detrimental to results. So, what's sponsorship leverage? And this is the definition I use all the time. It's everything that a sponsor does to achieve marketing and business goals via the sponsorship. So, it's everything that you do to build the brand. It's everything that you do to achieve sales objectives, to achieve staff objectives, to achieve loyalty objectives or content objectives or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Well, it's everything that you do. So it's a really, really wide net that's cast. It's broad. It spans channels, audiences, time frames, and it's not just on site. An example of that might be a local sponsorship that has so much relevance it could be turned into a national level campaign through really creative leverage. So leverage is just the thing that takes the opportunity you've invested in and turns it into a range of results against objectives. So with that in mind, what is sponsorship activation? Now, there are some organizations that use these interchangeably, and the definition is the same. The definition is just exactly what I just said for leverage. But for so many organizations, and these organizations are sponsors, they're rights holders, they're agencies, the definition of activation has just narrowed over time. It's really, really narrowed to be really about only two things. The first one is on-site activity and activation spaces. So the fact that they're called activation spaces really lends you, if you're using the word activation, to focus on that in-person, on-site activity. Now, this could include sampling and experiential stuff, and it could include promotions on site and things that happen on the big screen where people are using apps or participating in texting things. I mean, there's all tons of stuff that can happen on site, and I'm not bagging that at all, but it is limited. I mean, it's really cutting out all of the remote fans, the people that care about what you're sponsoring, but for whatever reason, they haven't rocked up. Now, thinking about this, think about like Manchester United. There is a report that Manchester United has 1.1 billion, with a B, fans around the world. Now, if you were sponsoring Manchester United and all you did in terms of adding value to the fan experience was on site for the people that actually could get tickets and rock up in Manchester, then you'd be leaving tons and tons of people that genuinely care and could genuinely be leveraged to out in the cold. So those remote fans are just left. So whatever you do on site, that's fine. I mean, that is absolutely fine, but that shouldn't be all that you do. So the other thing that tends to get involved with activation is a social media push in the rights holders' socials, not in your socials, you sponsors, but in the rights holder socials. There's that focus. And it usually is in a very tight time frame around the event, around the season, around games, around an exhibition or whatever. And really doesn't turn into this year-round, interesting, content-generated things that is not only in the rights holder media, but is actually primarily in the sponsor social media. So this, narrow activation window of people that rock up on site and this window of short-term sort of social media stuff in only the rights holder channels, it really reduces the potential. So if somebody says, what's our activation plan? And what they're really referring to is what are we going to do on site and what are we going to do in rights holder socials, then the definition of activation has gotten too narrow. Again, why does this matter? First off, on-site activation ignores those remote fans, and that is really critically important. If you aren't actually leveraging to the remote fans, the people that care, that may not follow the rights holder socials, that may not rock up at games or events, that there are tons of people that actually could be leveraged to for the benefit of a brand. Activation can also be inefficient. I mean, doing stuff on site is costly. It's costly. And if you think about doing like a VR rig, so you've got like 4 VR rigs and you can run people through them pre-game, and they put on all the gear and they get to do something that's just super cool if you get to do it. But pre-game, how many people would be able to go through that? A few hundred, maybe, out of how many people in the stadium? And how much is that costing you to create it and man it for every home game? Probably quite a lot. It can be really inefficient. That is another reason why that sort of focus on the in-person and rights holder socials can be really counterproductive. The other thing is that activation, if it's like really around the rights holder socials and what happens on site, you're basically, as a sponsor, volunteering to compete in the most cluttered space there is. I mean, that's where all the sponsors are. That's where all the logos are. That's where all the activation spaces are. There's tons of stuff happening in rights holder socials that could be just as interesting or more interesting in what you're doing in rights holder socials. So you're actually volunteering to play in the most cluttered space. And that can be, again, inefficient. So leverage, thinking about it more broadly, allows a differentiation across lots of varied channels beyond all that on-site or rights holder socials clutter. So I'm not saying you can't do stuff on-site or in rights holder socials, but you should be doing lots more stuff, tons more stuff through other channels as well. So what can you do about it? What I want you to do is to reframe your sponsorship strategy so you're avoiding budgets that are dominated by on-site activation and rights holder socials. So if 90% of your budget is what you're going to do there, you've fallen into the activation trap and you need to get out of it. I tend to use with clients that have fallen into that activation trap the term broader leverage. So I could say, look, I can see what you're doing with activation, but what are we going to do with your broader leverage outside of those two very cluttered spaces? How is it that we can plan to include those remote fans, the staff, the customers, the online audiences that aren't following those socials, your customers, your potential customers? And we also want ideas that can scale to those remote fans. Basically, if somebody comes up with an idea that is an on-site activation, you can actually say something like, great activation idea. Now, how do we scale it for the remote fans so we can multiply its impact? So the upshot of all of this is that leverage is broader, it's more comprehensive than activation. Now, if you are using these things interchangeably and your activation is really broad, it really is doing a lot of things outside of just on-site and in the rights holder socials, then fine. Look, call it whatever you want. But what I don't want you to do is allow this narrowing of the term activation to start actually dominating your sponsorship portfolio. So what I would like you to do, please, is to like, subscribe, and comment on whether your organization calls it activation or leverage, and whether that means that what you're doing is really broad in terms of geography, time frame, channels, audiences, stakeholders, etc., or whether it has fallen into that activation trap and gotten narrower over time. So if you want a deeper dive, there is a related blog, and I've put the link to that in the video description. There's also lots and lots more resources on my website, powersponsorship.com. And in the video description, you'll also find related links, some additional resources, where to find me in socials, and also, if you're interested, how to work with me. And that's it. Thanks a lot for your time, and I'll see you next time.